I've spent 20 years investigating cold cases, missing children, unsolved murders, families destroyed by secrets. Last month, I found a photograph from 1979, a 3-year-old girl in a daisy dress. The caption said Sarah Holloway, missing. The dress was in my baby album. The girl was me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, or what I thought was the beginning. 6 months ago, my mother died. Margaret Morgan. Maggie. To everyone who knew her. 76 years old. Retired elementary school teacher. Devoted wife. Loving mother. She had a stroke in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning, collapsed between the refrigerator and the stove, and was gone before the paramedics arrived. I found her. I'd stopped by to drop off groceries, something I did every week since Dad moved to the assisted living facility. The door was unlocked. The coffee pot was still on, and my mother was lying on the floor with her eyes open, staring at something I couldn't see. The funeral was small. Mom didn't have many friends left. Most of them had died or moved to Florida. My brother Tom gave the eulogy. My father sat in the front row, not entirely sure where he was or why everyone was crying. Alzheimer's had taken most of him by then. Sometimes he recognized me. Sometimes he called me by my mother's name. Sometimes he just stared. I didn't cry at the funeral. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I'd spent too many years writing about other people's grief to know how to feel my own. Or maybe some part of me, some small, buried part I didn't want to acknowledge, had always known that something about my family wasn't quite right. I went back to work 3 days later. That's what I do. That's who I am. Rebecca Morgan. Investigative journalist for the Washington Chronicle, specializing in cold cases and long-form features. 20 years of digging up secrets. 20 years of giving families answers they'd waited decades to hear. Elena Vasquez, my editor, cornered me at my desk on a Friday afternoon. "You look like hell," she said. Elena was 52, Cuban-American, and had exactly zero tolerance for bullshit. I respected her more than almost anyone I'd ever worked for. "Thanks. That's what I was going for. When's the last time you slept?" Define slept. She dropped a folder on my desk. "I have an assignment for you. Before you say no, hear me out." I wasn't going to say no. You were going to say you're fine and you don't need special treatment and you can handle the regular workload. You think working harder will make the grief go away. It won't. Trust me. I didn't argue. She was right. What's the assignment? Cold case retrospective. Virginia's oldest unsolved disappearances. She tapped the folder. March 15th marks the 45th anniversary of the Sarah Holloway case. Little girl, 3 years old, vanished from her front yard in a town called Millbrook, never found. One of the state's most famous mysteries. I opened the folder. Standard case summary, police reports, newspaper clippings yellowed with age, and a photograph. A little girl with light brown hair and green eyes, wearing a white dress covered in embroidered daisies. She was smiling at the camera, one hand raised in a wave, the other clutching a stuffed rabbit. My heart did something strange. A flutter, a skip, something that felt like recognition, though I couldn't say why. "You okay?" Elena asked. "Fine." I closed the folder. "When do you need it?" 2 weeks. "Think you can handle it?" "I always handle it." Elena studied me for a moment. Whatever she saw in my face, she decided not to push. "Take care of yourself, Becca. Your mother just died. It's okay to not be okay." After she left, I sat at my desk and stared at the folder. I'd covered hundreds of cold cases in my career. Missing children, murdered wives, vanished husbands. I'd learned to approach each one with professional detachment, empathy for the families. Yes, but enough distance to do the job without falling apart. This one felt different. I opened the folder again. Looked at the photograph of Sarah Holloway. Something about her face. Something about that dress. Something I couldn't name. Tugging at the edges of my memory. like a word on the tip of my tongue. I read the case summary. Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, born the 20th of March 1976, disappeared the 15th of March 1979 from the front yard of her family home at 47 Miller Street, Millbrook, Virginia. Her mother, Catherine Holloway, was hanging laundry in the backyard. Her father, James Holloway, was at work. Her 2-year-old brother, Michael, was napping inside. When Catherine came back around the house, Sarah was gone. No witnesses, no ransom note, no body ever found. The investigation went on for years. A transient passing through town became the primary suspect, but he was never located. The case went cold in 1980. James and Catherine Holloway spent the next 4 decades searching, hoping, praying. James died 8 years ago. Heart attack, age 62. The obituary said, he never stopped looking for his daughter. I made a note to request the full case files from the Virginia State Police. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. But as I gathered my things to leave for the night, I found myself looking at the photograph one more time. That dress. Those daisies. I'd seen it before. I was sure of it. I just couldn't remember where. That night, I dreamed about a little girl in a white dress, running through a field of flowers. She was calling for someone, her mother. Maybe, but no one answered. When she turned around, her face was my face. And then I woke up, gasping, heart pounding, alone in my empty apartment at 3 a.m. I told myself it was stress, grief, my mind playing tricks. I told myself a lot of things in those early days. None of them were true. The dream stayed with me for days. That little girl running through flowers, her face becoming my face. The silence where an answer should have been. I told myself it was nothing. Grief does strange things to the mind. My mother had just died. My father was fading. Of course, my subconscious was working overtime, but I couldn't stop thinking about that photograph. On Saturday morning, I drove to my mother's house in Westchester. The place had been empty since her death. Tom was handling the estate sale. Slowly, reluctantly, and walking through the front door felt like stepping into a museum of my childhood. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The ceramic cats on the windowsill, the cross-stitched "Home Sweet Home" hanging in the hallway, the smell of lavender and old books that I'd associated with safety for as long as I could remember. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Something, anything. A reason for the unease that had settled into my bones since Elena dropped that folder on my desk. I started in the attic. My mother kept everything. Report cards from the 1980s. Christmas ornaments we'd made in elementary school. Boxes of photographs that she'd always meant to organize but never did. I found the photo albums in a trunk beneath the window. Leather-bound, labeled by year in my mother's neat handwriting. I pulled out the one marked 1979 to 1982 and sat cross-legged on the dusty floor. Page 1. Christmas 1979. Tom, age 6, holding up a toy truck. Me, or the girl I'd always believed was me, sitting on my father's lap, wearing a red velvet dress. Page 3. Easter 1980. Tom and me hunting for eggs in the backyard. I was wearing overalls and a yellow shirt. Page 14. I stopped breathing. A little girl, approximately 3 years old, standing in a garden. Light brown hair, green eyes, a thin scar on her left eyebrow. She was wearing a white dress covered in embroidered daisies. The same dress. The exact same dress. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the photograph of Sarah Holloway I'd saved from the case file, held it next to the album. Same dress, same hairstyle, same dimple on the left cheek, same scar on the eyebrow. The same girl. My hands started shaking. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a popular dress. Maybe thousands of little girls wore that pattern in 1979. Maybe. I turned the photo over. My mother's handwriting on the back. Rebecca, age 3, summer 1000. 979. Summer 1979. 4 months after Sarah Holloway disappeared, I sat in that attic for an hour, comparing photographs. Sarah Holloway and Rebecca Morgan, side by side, feature by feature. The shape of the eyes identical, the curve of the smile identical. The scar on the left eyebrow, the case file mentioned that Sarah Holloway fell off a swing 2 weeks before she vanished. She needed 3 stitches. I had always been told my scar came from falling off my bicycle when I was 4. I had no memory of falling off a bicycle. I had no memories from before I was 4 at all. My mother always said that was normal. You were so young, sweetheart. Nobody remembers being 3. I'd accepted that explanation my whole life. Now I wasn't sure I could accept anything. I dug deeper into the boxes, found my birth certificate, Rebecca Ann Morgan, born the 20th of March, 1976, in New York City. Parents, Richard Morgan and Margaret Morgan. But I also found my mother's medical records. She'd kept everything, organized in manila folders with color-coded tabs. And in the folder marked 1975, I found the truth she never told me. Margaret Morgan had a hysterectomy in September 1975. 7 months before I was supposedly born, my mother couldn't have given birth to me. It was medically impossible. I sat in that attic, surrounded by the carefully preserved evidence of my childhood, and felt my entire identity start to crack. Who was I? If I wasn't Rebecca Morgan, born in New York City on the 20th of March, 1976, then who was I? The answer was in that photograph. That daisy dress. That case file, sitting on my desk 40 miles away. Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, born the 20th of March, 1976. Same birthday, different city. Disappeared the 15th of March, 1979, from Millbrook, Virginia. I pulled out my phone again. Searched for Millbrook, Virginia. Population 3,400. Located in the Blue Ridge foothills, about 200 miles from Washington, D.C. Then I searched for Richard Morgan. Detective. Virginia. The results made my blood run cold. My father, Richard Morgan, the man who taught me to ride a bike and walked me down the aisle at my wedding and told me he loved me every day of my life, had been a police officer in Millbrook, Virginia, from 1973 to 1982. He was assigned to the Sarah Holloway case. He was one of the primary investigators. And in 1982, 3 years after Sarah vanished, he transferred to the New York City Police Department. He brought his wife and their 3-year-old daughter with him, a daughter who had no birth records in Virginia, a daughter whose mother couldn't have given birth to her, a daughter wearing the same dress as the missing girl whose case her father was supposed to solve. I closed the photo album, closed my eyes, tried to breathe. There had to be another explanation. There had to be. I was Rebecca Morgan. I had a brother named Tom, parents who loved me, a childhood full of birthday parties and family vacations and bedtime stories. None of that could be a lie. Could it? I needed more information. I needed to see the original case file. I needed to talk to someone who remembered what happened in Millbrook in 1979. But first, I needed to talk to my father. I called the assisted living facility and scheduled a visit for the next morning. The nurse warned me that Dad was having more bad days than good ones lately. His memory was like Swiss cheese, moments of clarity surrounded by vast, empty holes. Maybe that was a blessing. If he was lucid, I could ask him directly. And if he wasn't, instans tel avi, a lauter cons to scram. If he wasn't, maybe he'd tell me something he'd never meant to say. That night, I didn't dream about the little girl in the daisy dress. I dreamed about my father, standing in a doorway, holding a child in his arms. A woman's voice, my mother's voice, saying, "We'll give her a better life. She'll never know." I woke up at 4 a.m., heart pounding, the words echoing in my skull. She'll never know. But I was starting to. I spent Sunday doing what I do best. Research. My father's career was a matter of public record. Richard Morgan joined the Millbrook Police Department in 1973, fresh out of the academy, 23 years old and eager to serve. He made detective in 1977, one of the youngest in the department's history. In March 1979, he was assigned to the Sarah Holloway kidnapping. I found old newspaper articles in the Chronicle's archive. Local detective. Leads search for missing girl. Investigators pursue new leads in Holloway case. My father's face stared back at me from grainy photographs. Younger, sharper, with the confident eyes of a man who believed he could solve anything. He was interviewed multiple times. "We're following every lead," he told the Millbrook Gazette in April 1979. "We won't rest until Sarah is home safe." But Sarah never came home. By August 1979, the investigation had stalled. A transient named Walter Brennan became the primary suspect after a witness claimed to see him near the Holloway house on the day Sarah disappeared. Brennan had a record: petty theft, trespassing, one arrest for indecent exposure. He fit the profile of a predator. My father was the one who identified Brennan as the lead suspect. He was the one who presented the evidence to the district attorney, and when Brennan allegedly fled the state, my father was the one who declared the trail had gone cold. The case was officially closed in December 1980. 2 years later, my father transferred to New York. I printed everything, spread it across my dining room table, drew lines between dates, names, locations. The 15th of March 1979, Sarah Holloway disappears. Summer 1979. Photograph of Rebecca Morgan in identical daisy dress. December 1980. Case closed. Suspect never found. January 1982. Richard Morgan transfers to NYC with wife and daughter. The timeline was damning. But timelines aren't evidence. I needed more. I searched for adoption records. Nothing. No court filings, no agency paperwork, no international adoption documentation. If my parents had adopted me legally, there would be a paper trail. There wasn't. I searched for my birth certificate again. It looked legitimate, official seal, proper signatures, but I'd written enough stories about document fraud to know that anything could be forged if you knew the right people. My father had been a cop for 35 years. He knew the right people. I needed to talk to him. But first, I needed to understand what I was walking into. I called the Millbrook Police Department on Monday morning. "I'm a journalist with the Washington Chronicle," I said. "I'm working on a retrospective piece about the Sarah Holloway case. I'd like to request access to the original case files." The woman on the other end, Sergeant Linda Walsh, according to her greeting, paused. "That case is still technically open. We don't release files on open investigations. It's been 45 years. Surely there's a process for cold cases." "Ma'am, I understand, but the Holloway case is sensitive. There's been renewed interest recently. I can't authorize file access without approval from the detective handling the review." "There's a detective reviewing the case?" Another pause. Longer this time. I shouldn't have said that. "Look, if you want information, you'll need to go through official channels. Submit a FOIA request. It'll take a few weeks." I didn't have a few weeks. The anniversary piece was due in 10 days. "Is there anyone I could speak with informally? Someone who was involved in the original investigation?" Sergeant Walsh sighed. "Most of those guys are dead or retired. But there's one officer still around, Frank Patterson. He was a beat cop back then. Did some legwork on the case. Lives in Richmond now. Retired about 15 years ago." She gave me his number. I called him that afternoon. Frank Patterson was 81 years old, sharp as a tack, and suspicious of journalists. "The Holloway case," he said, his voice crackling through the phone. "Yeah, I remember it. Worst case of my career. That little girl just vanished. No trace, no body, nothing." "What was the investigation like?" "Chaotic. Whole town turned out to search. Volunteers combing the woods, dragging the river, checking every barn and basement. We had FBI involvement for a while. National media attention. It was a nightmare. And the suspect? Walter Brennan? Frank went quiet for a moment. Brennan was a convenient suspect. Drifter, criminal record, no alibi, perfect scapegoat. You don't think he did it? I don't think anyone ever proved he did. He was never found, never charged, never tried. The case closed because we ran out of leads, not because we solved anything. I hesitated. Then asked the question that had been burning in my chest since I found that photograph. Mr. Patterson, do you remember a detective named Richard Morgan? The silence on the other end lasted long enough to make my stomach drop. I remember him, Frank said finally. Good cop, smart, dedicated. But there were rumors. What kind of talk? His wife, Margaret. She was friendly with the Holloway family. Used to babysit Sarah, sometimes, before she disappeared. People noticed that after the kidnapping, Margaret stopped going out, stopped talking to the neighbors, and the Morgans moved away pretty suddenly. Couple years later, my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Did anyone investigate them? Investigate a fellow officer's wife? In 1979? In a town like Millbrook? Frank laughed bitterly. Nobody wanted to go there. And Richard, he was running the investigation. He controlled what leads got followed up and which ones got buried. Are you saying he covered something up? Another long pause. I'm saying that case never sat right with me. Too many loose ends, too many convenient dead ends. And Richard Morgan was right in the middle of all of it. I thanked Frank for his time. Hung up the phone. Then I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, trying to process what I'd just learned. My mother had babysat Sarah Holloway. My father had led the investigation into her disappearance. And 3 years later, they moved across the country with a daughter who had no verifiable origin. The pieces were falling into place. I needed to see my father. I needed to look him in the eye and ask him the question I was terrified to answer. I grabbed my keys and drove to the assisted living facility. It was nearly 7 p.m. when I arrived. The nurse at the front desk, a kind woman named Patricia, looked surprised to see me. Miss Morgan, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. I know. I'm sorry. I need to see him. Patricia's face shifted. Something sympathetic. Something cautious. Your brother was here this afternoon. He took some of your father's personal items. Said it was for estate planning. I felt the blood drain from my face. What items? I'm not sure exactly. A box of files? Some old photographs. He said he'd discussed it with you. He hadn't. Tom hadn't said a word. Is my father awake? He's resting. Today was a difficult day. He's been confused, agitated. I'd recommend waiting until tomorrow when he's had some sleep. I wanted to push past her, to run to my father's room and demand answers. But Patricia was right. If Dad was having a bad day, I wouldn't get anything coherent out of him. And Tom had taken files. Photographs. What was he trying to hide? I drove home in a daze. By the time I reached my apartment, one thing was certain. My brother knew something. And whatever it was, he didn't want me to find out. I was going to find out anyway. I didn't sleep that night. By 7 a.m., I was parked outside Tom's law firm in Manhattan, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that housed Morgan, Whitfield and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious criminal defense practices. My brother had spent 20 years building his reputation as the attorney you called when you were guilty but wanted to walk free anyway. I'd always admired his success. Now, I wondered what it had cost him. Tom arrived at 8:15, driving a black Mercedes that cost more than my annual salary. I intercepted him in the parking garage before he could reach the elevator. Becca? He looked genuinely surprised. We need to talk. I have a meeting at 8:30. Cancel it. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance. Calculation. Then that smooth mask he wore in courtrooms, the one that gave nothing away. All right. Let's go to my office. His corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Diplomas and awards covered one wall. Family photographs covered another. Tom with his wife Jennifer. Their 2 sons. Our parents at various stages of life. I noticed there were no baby pictures of me. None. Before age 4 or 5. Coffee? Tom asked. No. I want to know what you took from Dad's room yesterday. The mask slipped, just for a second. Then he recovered. Estate planning documents. Financial records. Nothing you'd be interested in. The nurse said you took photographs. Old family photos. I'm putting together an album for Dad. Something he can look at on his good days. You didn't mention any of this to me. You've had a lot on your plate. Mom's death, the estate, your job. I didn't want to burden you with administrative details. I'd spent 20 years interviewing liars, criminals, politicians, corporate executives, people who made their living obscuring the truth. I knew every tell, every deflection, every verbal trick. Tom was using all of them. I found something interesting in Mom's house, I said. In the attic, a photo album. Summer 1979. There's a picture of me wearing a dress white with embroidered daisies. Tom's expression didn't change, but his hand, reaching for his coffee mug, paused mid-motion. That's nice, he said carefully. The same dress appears in the case file for Sarah Holloway, the little girl who disappeared from Millbrook, Virginia, in March 1979. The case Dad was assigned to investigate. Silence. Dad was a detective in Virginia, Tom said slowly. He worked a lot of cases. He worked this specific case, and 3 years after Sarah vanished, he moved to New York with a daughter who has no adoption records, whose mother couldn't biologically have children, wearing the same dress as the missing girl. Tom set down his coffee. His face had gone pale beneath his tan. Becca, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking questions. The same questions any journalist would ask when the evidence points in a certain direction. The evidence? Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. You found a similar dress in a 45-year-old photograph. That's not evidence. That's coincidence. The dress. The scar on my eyebrow. The same birthday. Mom's hysterectomy in 1975. I leaned forward. How many coincidences before it becomes a pattern? Tom stood abruptly, walked to the window, kept his back to me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Let it go, Becca. I can't. You can. You're choosing not to. He turned around. Mom just died. Dad is fading. Do you really want to dig up the past right now? Some stories don't have happy endings. Is that what this is? A story with an unhappy ending? I'm trying to protect you. Protect this family. From what? Tom's jaw tightened. From yourself. From the destruction you'll cause if you keep pulling at this thread. You're a journalist. You think you can investigate anything, expose anyone, and consequences be damned. But this isn't some stranger's family, Becca. This is ours. Then tell me the truth. The truth is that Mom and Dad loved you. They gave you everything. A home, an education, opportunities. Whatever happened before, he stopped. Realized what he'd said. Before what, Tom? He closed his eyes. I didn't mean. Before what? I was on my feet now. What happened before? What do you know? Nothing. I don't know anything. You're lying. You've been lying since I walked in here. I moved toward him. The files you took from Dad's room, what was in them? What are you trying to hide? Tom's composure finally cracked. For a moment, I saw something beneath the polished attorney, the successful older brother, the man who always had an answer for everything. Fear. I'm trying to protect you, he said again, but his voice had changed. Quieter, almost desperate. If you keep digging, you won't like what you find. And once you know, you can't unknow it. Is that really what you want? I want the truth. The truth will destroy this family. The truth already exists, Tom. Whether I find it or not doesn't change what happened. It just changes whether we keep living a lie. We stared at each other across his expensive office. 45 years of secrets, hovering between us like smoke. I can't stop you, Tom finally said. You're too stubborn, too determined. You always have been. He walked to his desk, picked up a pen, wrote something on a notepad. But I can warn you, if you go down this path, you'll lose everything you think you know about this family. About yourself. And I won't be able to protect you anymore. I don't need your protection. Yes. You do. He handed me the paper. You just don't know it yet. I looked at what he'd written. A name and address. Catherine Holloway, 47 Miller Street, Millbrook, Virginia. Sarah's mother is still alive, Tom said. She still lives in the house where her daughter disappeared. If you want the truth so badly, go ask her. But don't come crying to me when you realize the truth is worse than the lie. I took the paper, folded it carefully, put it in my pocket. Thank you. Don't thank me. Tom's voice was flat. I just handed you a grenade. What you do with it is your choice. I walked to the door, stopped with my hand on the handle. One more question. What? How long have you known? Tom didn't answer. But his silence told me everything. That night, I came home to find my apartment had been broken into. The door was intact. Someone had picked the lock. Professional work. Nothing obvious was missing. My laptop was still on the desk. My jewelry was still in the drawer. But the box of my mother's photo albums, the ones I'd brought back from Westchester, was gone. Every photograph, every piece of evidence, vanished. Just like Sarah Holloway, someone was trying to stop me. The break-in wasn't random. Nothing of value was taken, just the photographs. The only evidence that connected Rebecca Morgan to Sarah Holloway. Tom. It had to be Tom, but proving it would be impossible. And frankly, it didn't matter. The photographs were gone, but the truth was still out there. I just needed to find another way to it. I spent the next morning filing a police report I knew would go nowhere. Then drove to a CVS pharmacy and bought a DNA ancestry kit, $23.99 to answer the question that had consumed my entire existence. The instructions were simple. Spit in a tube, mail it back. Wait 2 to 3 weeks for results. 2 to 3 weeks felt like a lifetime, but I couldn't just sit and wait. So, I did what I always do. I kept investigating. I requested the full Sarah Holloway case file through official channels. FOIA request. Submitted to the Virginia State Police with all the proper forms and journalist credentials. They told me it would take 4 to 6 weeks to process. I didn't have 4 to 6 weeks. The anniversary piece was due in 8 days, so I called in favors. 20 years as a journalist builds a network. Cops, lawyers, records clerks, people who owe you for stories you didn't write or sources you didn't reveal. By Wednesday, I had a bootleg copy of the case file delivered to my apartment in a manila envelope with no return address. I spread the contents across my dining room table and read every page. The investigation had been thorough, at least on paper. Hundreds of interviews, door-to-door canvasses, search parties covering a 50-mile radius, dive teams, dragging every pond and river within driving distance. Nothing. Sarah Holloway had vanished like smoke. The suspect, Walter Brennan, appeared on page 147. A drifter with a criminal record. Seen in Millbrook the week before the disappearance. One witness claimed to have spotted him near the Holloway house on the morning of March 15th, but the witness statement was thin. The description was vague, and Brennan himself was never found to confirm or deny his involvement. What caught my attention was my father's handwriting in the margins of the investigator's notes. Brennan likely fled state. Recommend closing active investigation. All viable leads exhausted. The recommendation was dated August 1979, only 5 months after Sarah disappeared. 5 months to give up on a 3-year-old girl. I kept reading. Page 203. Interview with Margaret Morgan, neighbor of the Holloway family. My mother. Mrs. Morgan states, she occasionally babysat Sarah Holloway at the request of Mrs. Holloway. She describes Sarah as a sweet child, very trusting. Mrs. Morgan reports no suspicious activity in the neighborhood prior to the disappearance. She expresses deep sympathy for the family. The interview was conducted by Detective Richard Morgan. My father interviewed my mother about a child who would later become their daughter. I felt sick. Page 248. Follow-up notes on the Morgan family. Morgans have been helpful and cooperative throughout investigation. No indication of involvement. Recommend no further inquiry. Signed, Detective Richard Morgan. He'd cleared himself, cleared his wife, shut down any line of investigation that might have led to the truth. And then, 3 years later, they'd moved away with Sarah Holloway, renamed Rebecca Morgan, and started a new life on the other side of the country. I closed the file, sat in silence. The evidence was circumstantial but overwhelming. The dress, the timing, the medical records, my father's role in the investigation, my mother's connection to the victim. But evidence isn't proof. I needed something definitive, something that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as coincidence. I needed the DNA results. 2 weeks later, they arrived. I was at my desk at the Chronicle when my phone buzzed. Email notification from Ancestry Match. Your results are ready. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely click the link. The page loaded slowly. A spinning wheel. A progress bar. And then, based on your DNA sample, we have identified the following close family matches. 1 name. 1 photograph. Catherine Holloway. Relationship. Close family. Mother. Confidence. 99.97%. I stared at the screen. Read it again. Read it a third time. Read it a third time. Read it again. Read it a third time. 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 Bifinja Josajodan Josi. There was no room for coincidence. No alternative explanation. No way to pretend this was anything other than what it was. I was Sarah Elizabeth Holloway. The woman who raised me, Margaret Morgan, had stolen me from my front yard 45 years ago. The man who taught me to ride a bike had covered up the crime. The brother who'd warned me to stop digging had known the truth for God knows how long. My entire life was a lie. Everything I thought I knew about myself, my name, my birthday, my family, my identity was built on a foundation of kidnapping and deception. I closed my laptop, walked to the bathroom, threw up. When I came back, Elena was standing by my desk. Becca, you look like hell. What's wrong? I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until I'd processed what this meant, what I was going to do about it. I'm fine, I said. Just a stomach bug. Elena didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Take the rest of the day off. The Holloway piece can wait. The Holloway piece. The story I'd been assigned to write about a missing child. I was the missing child. I gathered my things, walked out of the office, and sat in my car for an hour without starting the engine. Then I pulled out the piece of paper Tom had given me. Catherine Holloway's address. The woman who had searched for me for 45 years. The mother I'd never known. I could go to the police. File a report. Let the justice system handle it. But this wasn't just a crime story. This was my life, my identity, my family, both of them. I needed to meet Catherine Holloway face to face. I needed to look into the eyes of the woman who had lost me and tell her that I'd been found. And then I needed to decide what to do with the truth. I started the car and drove south. Virginia was waiting. Millbrook, Virginia, looked exactly like a town that time forgot. Main Street was a postcard from another era, brick storefronts with hand-painted signs. A hardware store that probably hadn't changed its inventory since the Reagan administration. A diner with checkered curtains and a pie display in the window. Population 3,400. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone and secrets are supposed to be impossible to keep. But someone had kept a secret here for 45 years. The biggest secret of all. Thank you. I found 47 Miller Street at the edge of town, where the sidewalks ended and the fields began. It was a modest house, white clapboard, green shutters, a wraparound porch with a swing that creaked in the afternoon breeze. And in the front window, faded but still legible after 4.5 decades, was a poster. Missing. Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, age 3. Last seen the 15th of March 1979. Brown hair, green eyes. If you have any information, please contact the Millbrook Police Department. My own face stared back at me from that poster. Younger, rounder, but unmistakably mine. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to walk up those steps. What would I say? Hi, I'm the daughter who was stolen from your front yard 45 years ago. Sorry it took so long to find you. Nothing seemed adequate. Finally, I got out of the car and approached the house. The woman who answered the door was 68 years old, gray-haired, with eyes that had cried an ocean and somehow kept going. She was smaller than I'd imagined, barely 5 feet tall. Thin, in the way of people who'd forgotten to eat for decades. She looked at me, blinked, looked again. Her hand went to her chest. I'm a journalist, I said quickly, the words I'd rehearsed on the drive down. I'm writing a piece on cold cases for the Washington Chronicle. I was hoping to talk to you about your eyes. Catherine Holloway whispered. I stopped. You have James's eyes. Her voice cracked. My husband. He died 8 years ago. But you have his eyes. I couldn't breathe. May I come in? I managed. She stepped aside without a word, never taking her gaze off my face. The inside of the house was a shrine to a lost child. Photographs of Sarah, of me, covered every surface. Baby pictures, toddler pictures. The last photograph ever taken, on the morning of the 15th of March 1979, showing a little girl in a daisy dress waving at the camera. The same photograph that had started this whole nightmare. You know, Catherine said softly. Don't you? You know who you are. I turned to face her. I think so. But I need you to tell me. Life. Sit down. Please. We sat in her living room, me, on a faded floral couch, her in a rocking chair that looked like it had held her through countless sleepless nights. Between us, on the coffee table, was a scrapbook labeled Sarah's Story. I was hanging laundry, Catherine began, her voice distant, reciting words she'd said 1,000 times. In the backyard, Sarah was playing in the front. She knew not to leave the yard. She was such an obedient child, such a good girl. Her hands trembled as she opened the scrapbook. I heard a car. I didn't think anything of it. Cars passed all the time. But when I came around the house, Sarah was gone. Just gone. Her ball was still there. Her shoes were still there. But my baby was gone. Did you see anything? Anyone? Nothing. No one. Catherine wiped her eyes. The police came. Everyone came. The whole town searched for weeks. They dragged the river. They searched every basement and barn. They brought dogs, helicopters, psychics. Nothing. She turned the pages of the scrapbook. Newspaper clippings, search party photographs, age progression images showing what Sarah might look like at 10, 20, 30. They all looked like me. They found a suspect, Catherine continued, a drifter named Walter Brennan, but they never caught him. The detective said he must have fled the state. Richard Morgan. He was the lead investigator. He seemed so dedicated at first. But then what? He stopped returning my calls. Stopped giving me updates. The case went cold, and the Morgans moved away, and I was left here with nothing but questions. Catherine looked at me with those devastated eyes. But I never stopped looking. I never stopped believing. James, my husband, he searched until the day he died. Literally. He was putting up flyers when he had his heart attack. 8 years ago, 62 years old. The doctors said it was broken heart syndrome. They didn't understand how right they were. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. She reached across the table and took my hand. Tell me who you are. I couldn't lie to her. Not after 45 years of lies. I took a DNA test, I said. It matched you. 99.97% confidence. Mother. Catherine's grip tightened. Her whole body began to shake. Sarah? One word. One name. The name I'd never known was mine. I think so. I don't remember anything from before I was 4. I was raised by Richard and Margaret Morgan in New York. I thought I was their biological daughter. I thought. My voice broke. I thought I was Rebecca Morgan. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Catherine pulled me into her arms. She was crying deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. And then I was crying too. 45 years of grief and loss and lies pouring out of both of us. My baby, she kept saying. We held each other for a long time. When we finally separated, Catherine's face was wet with tears, but she was smiling, the first real smile she'd allowed herself in decades. There's so much I need to tell you, she said. So much you need to know. I want to know everything. She stood, walked to a bookshelf, and pulled down a worn leather journal. This was your father's. James kept a record of everything, every search, every lead, every dead end. He never stopped believing you were alive. She handed me the journal. On page 247, you'll find something important, something the police ignored. I opened to the page. My biological father's handwriting cramped and urgent. The Morgans. There's something wrong about them. The way Margaret looked at Sarah, the way they left so suddenly. But no one will listen to me. My blood ran cold. He knew. I whispered. He suspected. But Richard Morgan was a police officer, a respected detective. No one would investigate one of their own. Catherine's voice hardened. Your father went to Richard once, 5 years after you disappeared. Confronted him directly. Richard threatened him. Told him to stop, or he'd make sure James never saw his son again. Michael. My brother. Your brother. Catherine smiled through her tears. He's been investigating the Morgans for years, building a case, waiting for the day we'd have enough evidence to prove what really happened. As if on cue, the front door opened. A man walked in, 43 years old, broad-shouldered, with my father's eyes and my mother's chin. He wore a detective's badge on his belt. He stopped when he saw me. His face went through a dozen emotions in seconds. Shock, disbelief, hope, joy. Sarah? His voice cracked on the name. I stood. I go by Becca. But, yes. Michael Holloway crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled me into a hug so fierce I couldn't breathe. I knew it, he said into my hair. I knew you were alive. Dad knew. And now, he pulled back, holding me at arm's length, studying my face. Now, we can finally prove it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. I've been building this case for 20 years. And your brother Tom has been trying to stop me for just as long. But now that you're here, he opened the folder. Now we can finally get justice. I looked at the evidence spread before me, and I realized this was just the beginning. Michael Holloway spread 20 years of obsession across Catherine's dining table. I became a detective because of you, he said, not looking at me. Because of Sarah, because I was 7 years old when my baby sister disappeared, and I spent the rest of my childhood watching our family fall apart. The folder he'd carried contained over 200 pages, police reports, interview transcripts, surveillance photographs, a timeline that stretched from the 15th of March 1979 to 3 weeks ago. Dad started this, Michael continued, pulling out a leather notebook identical to the one Catherine had shown me. Page by page, year by year. When he died, I inherited his case, his obsession, his certainty. I stared at a photograph of myself at age 3. White dress, yellow daisies, the scar above my eyebrow, fresh and pink. The Morgans moved into the house next door in January 1979, Michael said. Margaret Morgan had a hysterectomy in 1975, verified through medical records I obtained 6 years ago. She couldn't have children. She wanted children. Desperately, Catherine sat beside me, her hand resting near mine but not quite touching, as if she wasn't sure she had the right. Richard Morgan was a patrol officer, Michael continued. Good reputation. Well liked. But Dad noticed something wrong with the investigation from the beginning. Evidence that should have been collected wasn't. Witnesses who should have been interviewed weren't. And the Morgans, the neighbors who were home that entire day, were cleared within 48 hours. Cleared by whom? I asked, though I already knew. Richard Morgan's partner, his best friend, Detective Harold Simmons. Michael pulled out a photograph. 2 men in police uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Simmons handled the initial investigation. He's the one who documented that the Morgans were at a church function when you disappeared. Except, he produced another document. Church records from 1979. There was no church function that day. I verified it with 3 separate sources. The Morgan alibi was fabricated, and Harold Simmons helped create it. My hands were shaking. Why didn't Dad go to the authorities? He did. Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. 3 times. 1,983, 1,991, and 2005. Each time, the case was reviewed and closed. Richard Morgan had risen through the ranks by then. Detective, sergeant, lieutenant. He had friends everywhere. And your father. She paused, composing herself. Your father was seen as a grieving parent who couldn't let go. Obsessed. Unreliable. Michael laid out a series of photographs. Me, at age 5, 7, 10, 15. All taken from a distance, through fences and windows. Dad followed you, he said quietly. Not often he knew Richard would have him arrested for stalking, but every few years he'd drive to wherever you were living, watch you walk to school, make sure you were alive, make sure you were okay. My biological father had watched me grow up from the shadows, while I called another man Dad, while I believed a fabricated history. He died knowing the truth, Catherine said. But he never got to tell you himself. He never got to hear you call him Dad. Not once. I picked up the photograph of myself at 15, lanky, awkward, carrying a backpack with a newspaper pin on the strap, already interested in journalism. Already drawn to uncovering secrets. I look just like him, I said. You do. Catherine touched the photo gently. Same eyes, same stubborn chin, same way of tilting your head when you're thinking. Michael closed the folder. There's more. But the most important piece is this. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. A handwritten note, dated 2017, the year James Holloway died. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally found its way home. I spent 38 years searching for you, and I want you to know, not a single day passed when I didn't think about you, when I didn't pray you were safe, when I didn't imagine what you might look like, who you might become. I loved you before you were born. I loved you every moment you were gone, and I will love you long after I'm gone. Whatever happened, whatever choices were made, you are not responsible for any of it. You were a child. You are innocent. And you are loved. Forever your father. James Edward Holloway. I couldn't read the last lines. My tears blurred the ink into watercolors. He wrote that 6 months before he died, Michael said. Made me promise to give it to you when you were ready. When you knew the truth. Catherine wrapped her arms around me the first time my biological mother had held me in 42 years. Welcome home, Sarah, she whispered. I stayed in Millbrook that night. And the next. And the one after that. Catherine showed me my childhood bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been in 1979. A small bed with a pink quilt, a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons, a mobile of paper stars that James had made, still hanging from the ceiling. I couldn't change it, she said. I know that sounds crazy, but changing it felt like giving up. Like admitting you were never coming back. I touched the paper stars. 42 years old, yellowed and fragile. Did you ever give up? I asked. Never. Her voice was fierce. Not for one single second. I knew you were out there. I felt it. Sarah, a mother knows. A mother always knows. Michael joined us for dinner each evening, filling in gaps that Catherine couldn't bear to discuss. The strain on their parents' marriage, the years Catherine spent in therapy, the medications that dulled the grief but never erased it. Tom Morgan knew, I said on the third night. My brother, my adoptive brother. He knew and said nothing. Michael nodded grimly. He found out in 2002. I have evidence emails between him and his father discussing the situation, discussing what would happen if you ever discovered the truth. What evidence? Richard Morgan's Alzheimer's made him careless. He started writing things down so he wouldn't forget. Dates, names, locations. Michael pulled out a photocopy of a handwritten page. 3 years ago, he wrote this. Tell Tom to destroy the Virginia files. Sarah can never know. Margaret's heart couldn't take it. Margaret's heart. My adoptive mother, who had loved me fiercely for 42 years, who had brushed my hair and kissed my scraped knees and cried at my wedding, who had stolen me from my crib when I was 3 years old. I don't know how to reconcile this, I admitted. She was my mother. She loved me. And she committed a crime, Michael said flatly. Whatever her motivations, whatever love came after she took a child, our parents spent 4 decades in agony. I looked at the paper stars, at the stuffed rabbit, at the pink quilt, waiting 42 years for a little girl who never came home. I need to confront Richard, I said. Before the Alzheimer's takes everything, I need to hear it from him. Why they did it, how they justified it. Catherine and Michael exchanged glances. Are you sure? Catherine asked. Some truths don't bring peace, Sarah. Some truths just bring more pain. I'm an investigative journalist, I said. I've spent my entire career finding truth. Now I need to find my own. I stood, looking out the window at the quiet street where I'd taken my first steps, where I'd learned to ride a tricycle, where I'd been stolen. Tomorrow, I said, I'm going back to New York, and I'm going to make my father tell me everything. The Sunrise Memory Care Facility sat on a quiet street in Queens, surrounded by maple trees that had probably been saplings when Richard Morgan was still a young cop, when he was still planning how to steal a child. I signed the visitor log at 2:47 p.m. Under relationship to resident, I wrote daughter. The word tasted like ash. Mr. Morgan is having a good day, the nurse told me, leading me down a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and artificial flowers. He's been asking about Margaret. We've had to remind him several times that she passed. Every few minutes, my father forgot his wife was dead. Every few minutes, he experienced that grief fresh and raw. Part of me thought it was justice. Part of me thought it was cruel. Most of me didn't know what to think anymore. Room 147. A small space with a hospital bed, a recliner, and photographs covering every wall. Me at age 5, 7, 15, 22. My wedding day. My graduation from Columbia. 42 years of a stolen life, documented and displayed. Richard Morgan sat in the recliner, staring out the window. He'd aged terribly since Margaret's funeral, thinner, grayer, his once sharp eyes now clouded with confusion. The man who had orchestrated a kidnapping and cover-up looked like someone's harmless grandfather. Dad, I said. He turned, and his face lit up. Becca, sweetheart. Margaret, look, Becca's here. He glanced at the empty chair beside him, expecting his wife to be there. The moment of confusion, when he remembered she wasn't, made his whole body sag. She's gone, he whispered. I keep forgetting. Why do I keep forgetting? I pulled a chair close to him. Dad, I need to talk to you about something important. About 1979. 1979? He brightened. Good year. I made detective in 79. Margaret was so proud. We had a little celebration, just the three of us. You were so small then, Becca. Just a tiny thing. I wasn't Becca in 1979, I said carefully. I was Sarah. His face went pale. For a moment, his eyes cleared, sharp and afraid, the way they must have looked when he was covering his tracks 4 decades ago. We don't talk about that, he said quickly. Margaret made me promise. We don't ever talk about that. Margaret's gone, Dad. And I know. I know everything. He started to shake. His hands, resting on the armrests, trembled violently. How? He whispered. I'm an investigative journalist. I was assigned to the Holloway cold case. I found the photograph. I found the dress. I got a DNA test. I leaned forward. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, and you're going to tell me why. The clarity in his eyes flickered there, then gone, then back again. Alzheimer's was stealing his mind in pieces, and I was racing against time to extract the truth. Margaret couldn't have babies, he said finally. The surgery, 1,975. She cried for months, years. She wanted a child so badly, Becca. You don't understand. It was destroying her. So she took someone else's? It wasn't like that. His voice cracked. The Holloways, they didn't deserve you. James was a drinker back then. Catherine was depressed all the time. They left you alone in the yard. Did you know that? 3 years old. And they left you alone. Margaret watched from our kitchen window. She said it was neglect. She said you needed a real mother. I felt sick. She kidnapped me because she thought she'd be a better parent. She saved you. His eyes were fierce now, defending a dead woman's crime. She gave you everything. Ballet lessons, private school, a safe home. Look at what you became. A journalist, successful. Would that have happened in Millbrook? In that broken family? That broken family spent 42 years grieving. James Holloway died without ever seeing his daughter again. Catherine kept my bedroom exactly as it was, waiting for me to come home. Richard's face crumpled. I didn't know. I didn't, Margaret said. They moved on. She said they had another baby, a boy, and they forgot about. They never forgot. They never stopped looking. And you, my voice shook with anger. You were a cop. You were supposed to protect people. Instead, you helped cover it up. You falsified reports. You destroyed evidence. You let your partner lie about your alibi. Harold. Richard nodded slowly. Harold Simmons. He owed me. I'd covered for him once, back in 77, something with a witness. I don't remember exactly. He said he'd take care of the investigation, make sure no one looked too closely at us. And when James Holloway reported his suspicions? 3 times? I had friends by then. Sergeants, lieutenants. They trusted me. He looked at his hands. It was easy. Too easy. I just had to say the word, and the case stayed closed. A corrupt cop. A desperate wife. A stolen child. And 42 years of lies holding it all together. Does Tom know? I asked. Richard's expression changed. Guarded. Even through the fog of dementia, he was protecting his biological son. Tom is a good boy, he said carefully. He does what's best for the family. He knew. He's known since 2002. He found the papers. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. Margaret's diary. She wrote everything down. Dates, times, how she did it. Tom found it when he was cleaning out the attic. He came to me, shaking. Asked if it was true, and you told him to keep quiet. I told him the truth would destroy you. Richard grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. You were happy, Becca. You had a career, a husband, well, before the divorce, a whole life built on being Rebecca Morgan. What good would it do to tear that apart? It wasn't your choice to make. Everything I did was to protect you. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. Every lie, every cover-up. I loved you, Becca. From the moment Margaret brought you home, I loved you like my own. Doesn't that count for anything? I stared at the man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who had committed federal crimes to keep me. Where's the diary? I asked coldly. Margaret's diary. Tom has it. He took it after she died, said it was too dangerous to leave lying around. Richard's eyes unfocused again, the Alzheimer's pulling him away. Margaret? Is that you? I thought I heard Margaret. He was gone. Slipped into whatever fog his disease created, calling for a wife who would never answer. I stood, looking at the photographs on the walls. 42 years of a stolen life, smiling back at me. Goodbye, Dad, I said. He didn't respond. He was already somewhere else, maybe 1,979, holding a 3-year-old girl he'd helped steal. Maybe believing, even now, that he'd done the right thing. I called Michael from the parking lot. I need Margaret's diary, I said. Tom has it, and I'm going to get it. Tom's law office occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Morgan and Associates. His name on the door, his face on the website, his reputation built on defending people who could afford to make their problems disappear. Just like our parents had made Sarah Holloway disappear. I didn't call ahead. I walked past the receptionist, ignored her protests, and pushed open the door to his corner office at 9:17 a.m. Tom was on the phone. He saw me and froze mid-sentence. I'll call you back, he said, and hung up without waiting for a response. Rebecca. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket like armor. I visited Dad yesterday. The color drained from his face. He gestured for his assistant to close the door. How is he? Tom asked, carefully, confused. Fragile, surprisingly talkative. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, uninvited. He told me about Margaret's diary. Tom's jaw tightened. Dad's mind isn't reliable anymore. You know that. Half of what he says is fantasy. Is it fantasy that Margaret wrote down everything? Dates, times, how she took me from the Holloway's backyard. Is it fantasy that you found that diary in 2002 and have been hiding it ever since? He didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. I want it, I said. The diary. Every page. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't. My voice cut through the room like a blade. Don't insult me, Tom. I'm an investigative journalist. I've spent 20 years getting people to tell me things they swore they'd never reveal. I've brought down senators, CEOs, criminals who thought they were untouchable. You think I can't find a diary? Tom walked to his bar cart, poured himself a whiskey despite the early hour, and drank half of it in one swallow. What do you want, Rebecca? Really? What's the end game here? The truth. The truth. He laughed bitterly. The truth is that our mother loved you. The truth is that Dad protected you your entire life. The truth is that you had a childhood most people would envy: private schools, family vacations, parents who adored you. Is that not enough truth? I was stolen. You were saved. He slammed the glass down. Do you know what James Holloway was like in 1979? A drunk, violent. Catherine was on antidepressants, barely functional. Mom watched them neglect you for months. She saw you sitting alone in the dirt while they screamed at each other inside. She didn't steal you, she rescued you. That's not her decision to make. Maybe not. But she made it. And you know what? She was right. Tom pointed at me. Look at you. Successful, educated, award-winning journalist. Would that have happened if you'd stayed with the Holloways? In that tiny town? With those broken people? Michael Holloway became a detective. He's spent 20 years fighting for justice. One success story doesn't Catherine Holloway survived 42 years of grief and never gave up hope. James Holloway spent his final years documenting everything, trying to find his daughter. They weren't broken, Tom. They were devastated by what your mother did. Tom sat heavily in his chair. For a moment, he looked older than his 48 years. What do you want? He asked again. Quieter this time. The diary. And then what? You publish a story? Destroy our family's name? Send our father to prison in the final years of his life? Dad has Alzheimer's. He's not going to prison, but his legacy will. Everything he built, 40 years of service, commendations, respect, all of it erased. He'll be remembered as the cop who helped kidnap a child. Tom leaned forward. Is that what you want? To destroy the man who raised you? I thought about Richard's trembling hands, his confusion, his desperate insistence that everything he'd done was out of love. I want the truth, I repeated. What happens after that is up to the truth itself. Tom reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. The sight of it made my stomach turn. $2 million, he said, writing as he spoke. I'll transfer it today. Untraceable. You walk away. Forget the diary exists, and our family stays intact. He slid the check across the desk. $2 million. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. You're trying to bribe me. I'm trying to protect our family. There's a difference. I picked up the check, looked at the number, and tore it in half. Then quarters, then eighths. I let the pieces flutter to his expensive carpet like snow. I'm not your family, I said. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, and you've known that for 24 years. Tom's face hardened. You're making a mistake. No. You made the mistake in 2002, when you chose to protect a crime instead of doing the right thing. I stood. I'm giving you 48 hours to deliver the diary to my apartment. After that, I go to the police, with everything I have. Michael Holloway's evidence. Dad's confession, yes, I recorded it. DNA results. 42 years of cover-up. Exposed. You'd destroy our father. Your father destroyed 2 families. I'm just telling the truth about it. I walked to the door. Then, paused. 48 hours, Tom. And if anything happens to me, if my apartment gets broken into again, if evidence goes missing, if I have any kind of accident, Michael Holloway has copies of everything. He'll release it all, to every newspaper, every news channel, every law enforcement agency in the country. Tom said nothing. His knuckles were white against the whiskey glass. I left his office at 9:34 a.m. The diary arrived at my apartment 41 hours later. A padded envelope, no return address, left with my doorman. Inside, a leather-bound journal with Margaret Morgan's handwriting on every page. The first entry was dated the 15th of March, 1979. Today I saved a little girl. Her name was Sarah. I sat on my couch, holding the evidence that would change everything, and started to read. I read Margaret Morgan's diary in one sitting. 7 hours, 2 pots of coffee, a box of tissues I didn't know I needed. The woman who raised me had documented everything. The 15th of March, 1979. The Holloways left Sarah alone in the backyard again. She was crying, covered in dirt, reaching toward the house. No one came. I watched for 23 minutes, and no one came for that baby. The 16th of March, 1979. Richard is terrified. He says we'll go to prison. I told him we saved her. I told him God wanted us to have her. He made some calls. His partner Harold will help. Everything will be fine. The 22nd of March, 1979. The search parties are getting closer. I keep Rebecca in the basement during the day. In the room, Richard soundproofed for his workshop. She cries for her mama. I tell her I'm her mama now. She'll understand eventually. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the journal, the basement. I'd grown up in that house. I'd played in that basement. And I never knew that in 1979, I'd been hidden there like a prisoner while search parties walked past our front door. I forced myself to continue. The 3rd of April, 1979. We're moving. Richard requested a transfer to New York. He says distance will keep us safe. I've already packed Rebecca's things, new clothes, new toys, everything a fresh start requires. By next month, Sarah Holloway will be a memory. Rebecca Morgan will be real. The 15th of April, 1979. Richard forged the adoption papers. He knows a clerk in family court, someone who owed him a favor. The documents look perfect. Rebecca Ann Morgan. Born the 12th of March, 1976, in Albany General Hospital. It's official now. She's ours. The adoption papers I'd seen my whole life framed in our living room, referenced whenever I asked about being adopted, were forgeries, created by a corrupt cop to cover up a kidnapping. Margaret's entries became less frequent after the move to New York. Monthly updates on my development. First day of kindergarten. Dance recitals. Birthday parties. The mundane details of a stolen childhood, but certain entries stood out. September 1983. James Holloway came to the police station today. Richard said he was ranting about evidence, about witnesses, about us. Harold handled it. The case stays closed, but I saw James through the window, thin, desperate, broken. Part of me wanted to tell him Sarah was safe, that she was loved, that she was happy, but I didn't. I couldn't. Rebecca is mine now. June 1991. Another inquiry. Another closure. Richard says James will never stop. I pray every night that he finds peace, that he lets go, that he understands, somehow, that I gave his daughter a better life. December 2002. Tom found my journal. He was cleaning the attic, looking for Christmas decorations, and he found it hidden in my hope chest. He read everything. He didn't speak to me for 3 days. Then he came to me, crying, and asked what we should do. I told him we do nothing. We protect our family. We protect Rebecca. He agreed. My son is a good man. Tom had known for 24 years. He'd carried that secret through law school, through his career, through every family dinner and holiday gathering. He'd looked me in the eye and lied, over and over and over. The final entry was dated 6 months ago, 3 days before Margaret died. I'm tired. The doctors say it could be any day now. Richard doesn't understand, his mind is too far gone. But I need to write this. One last time. For Rebecca. For Sarah. I loved you from the moment I saw you in that backyard. I loved you through every nightmare, every fever, every teenage rebellion. I loved you when you got married, when you got divorced, when you won your first journalism award. I have loved you for 45 years, and I will love you beyond death itself. What I did was wrong. I know that now. I knew it then, but I couldn't stop myself. The wanting was too strong. The emptiness was too deep. You filled a hole in my heart that nothing else could fill. I'm sorry for what I took from you. I'm sorry for the family you'll never know. I'm sorry for the lies, but I'm not sorry for loving you. I will never be sorry for that. Forgive me, if you can, and know that you were wanted. You were chosen. You were mine. Your mother, Margaret. I closed the diary at 3:47 a.m. The evidence was overwhelming. Margaret's confession, Richard's participation, Tom's cover-up, Harold Simmons's corruption, forged documents, falsified reports, a 42-year conspiracy to hide a kidnapped child. I had everything I needed to write the story that would define my career. The cold case that solved itself when the missing child turned out to be the journalist investigating it. Every news outlet in the country would run it. Book deals, movie rights, a Pulitzer. Probably. And the complete destruction of the Morgan family. Richard would die in disgrace, his legacy erased. Tom would be disbarred, possibly prosecuted for obstruction. Margaret's memory would be reduced to a single word: kidnapper. The parents who raised me, the brother who protected me, twisted as that protection was. The only family I'd known for 42 years. I picked up my phone and called Michael. "I have the diary," I said. "I have everything, and I don't know what to do." Silence on the line. "Then, what do you want?" "Sarah." I looked at the journal. At the photographs on my wall, Margaret at my graduation, Richard walking me down the aisle, Tom teaching me to drive. "I want to tell the truth," I said finally. "But I want to do it my way, on my terms." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to write this story. Every word of it. But before I publish, I'm going to give everyone involved a chance to speak. The Holloways, the Morgans, even Tom." I took a breath. The truth deserves to be complete. Not just the crime, the aftermath, the grief, the love, all of it. "That's very generous," Michael said quietly. "More generous than they deserve. Maybe. But it's who I am." I looked at Margaret's final entry. "You were wanted. You were chosen. You were mine. It's who both of my families made me." I spent 3 weeks writing the most important article of my career. Elena Vasquez, my editor at the Washington Chronicle, cleared my schedule indefinitely. "This is once-in-a-lifetime material," she said, leaning back in her chair with an expression caught between excitement and disbelief. "Take whatever you need: time, resources, travel budget." What I needed was exactly that: the truth. All of it. From everyone who had lived through this nightmare. Catherine Holloway sat with me for 9 hours across 3 separate days in her living room in Millbrook. She served tea. She never drank, her hands too unsteady to lift the cup. She told me about the morning I disappeared, how she'd stepped inside to answer the phone, how she'd been gone for 4 minutes, how those 4 minutes had shattered everything she'd ever known. "I blamed myself for 30 years, she said, her voice steady but her fingers trembling against the armrest. "Every single day. If I hadn't answered that phone, if I'd taken you inside with me, if I'd checked on you 1 minute sooner, if I'd been a better mother, a more careful mother, a mother who deserved to keep her child." "You were a good mother," I said, softly. "I was a grieving mother. There's a difference." She looked at the recorder on the coffee table between us. "I want people to understand what it's like. The not knowing, the hoping that destroys you slowly. The way you check every face in every crowd, searching for features that might have grown from the baby you lost. I did that for 42 years, Sarah. 42 years of looking for you in strangers' faces on subway platforms and grocery stores and school playgrounds." Michael gave me unrestricted access to his entire investigation. 20 years of documents filled 3 filing cabinets in his home office. Photographs, interview transcripts, dead ends, and near misses that had consumed his adult life. He showed me the surveillance photos James had taken over the decades for me at ages 5, 7, 10, 15, 22, and explained how his dying father had risked arrest to watch over a daughter he could never reach. "Dad died believing he'd failed you," Michael said quietly, spreading the photographs across his kitchen table. "He thought the truth would die with him, that the Morgans had won, that you'd live your whole life never knowing who you really were." He paused, his jaw tight with emotion. "I'm glad he was wrong. I just wish he'd lived to see it." Tom refused my interview requests for 16 days. His secretary cited scheduling conflicts. His voicemail remained full. His emails bounced back with auto-replies about extended leave. Then, on the 18th day, he appeared at my apartment door unannounced. No suit this time, just jeans and a wrinkled polo shirt, dark circles beneath his eyes. "If you're going to destroy my family," he said flatly, "I want my side on the record." We talked for 5 hours. He chain-smoked on my fire escape between segments, something I'd never seen him do. He defended our parents with the desperation of a man watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. He explained his 24 years of silence as protection for me, for them, for the fragile family structure he'd spent his adult life trying to preserve. I was 24 when I found that diary, he said, stubbing out his fourth cigarette. I had my whole career mapped out, my whole life ahead of me. And suddenly I learned that everything I believed about my family, about my mother, my father, my sister, was built on a crime. He looked at me with something between anger and pleading. What would you have done, Rebecca? Honestly, what would you have done? I would have told the truth. Easy to say now. Harder when you're actually living through it. I included every word in the article, every justification, every excuse, every twisted rationalization. I let readers judge for themselves whether a 24-year-old discovering his mother was a kidnapper deserved sympathy or condemnation. The article was scheduled for Sunday publication. Front page, above the fold, with a 16-page special investigative section. Elena called it the most significant story the Chronicle had published in 2 decades. Someone leaked it Thursday night. My phone erupted at 9:47 p.m. Texts, calls, emails, social media notifications, hundreds within the first hour. A complete draft had surfaced on Twitter, spreading faster than anyone could contain. By Friday morning, Sarah Holloway was trending nationwide, then worldwide. The journalist discovers she's the missing child. She was investigating 42-year kidnapping, solved by victim herself. Cop's daughter was stolen. Baby family covered up crime for decades. News vans materialized outside my building. Reporters surrounded Catherine's house in Millbrook. Tom's law firm released a 2-sentence statement, while partners scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Richard Morgan, lost in his fog of dementia, had no idea why strangers were shouting questions through his facility window. Elena called at dawn. We're publishing immediately. Online now. Print tomorrow. The leak doesn't change anything. Your account remains definitive. Who leaked it? Still investigating. Could be anyone. Interns, IT staff, legal review. She exhaled. Does it matter now? The truth is out. I watched coverage from my couch, curtains drawn, phone silenced. Cable networks ran the story continuously. Psychologists analyzed identity trauma. Legal experts predicted prosecutions. A text arrived from an unknown number. I didn't leak it, but I'm glad someone did. The truth was always going to hurt. At least now, it's over. Tom, I typed back. It's not over. It's just beginning. Catherine called that evening. Come home, she said. To Millbrook. Let your family take care of you. I looked around my apartment, Margaret's photographs, Richard's commendations, Rebecca Morgan's entire fabricated life. I'll be there tomorrow, I said. The consequences arrived like dominoes falling in slow motion, each one triggering the next in an unstoppable cascade. First came the Virginia State Bar Association. 3 days after my article exploded across the internet, Tom received formal notification that his law license was under emergency review. The charges filled 2 pages of dense legal language, but the summary was devastating. Obstruction of justice, failure to report a known felony, conspiracy to conceal material evidence of a kidnapping, and conduct unbecoming a member of the bar. 24 years of deliberate silence had finally caught up with him. They're making an example of me, Tom said when he called, his voice hollow and exhausted. I could hear ice clinking in a glass, drinking at 11 in the morning now. Every attorney in America is watching this case. The bar wants to demonstrate that covering up a crime, even a family crime, even for decades, even out of love, carries consequences. Real consequences. I stood at my kitchen window, watching pigeons gather on the fire escape. I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated, even triumphant. Part of me remembered the older brother who had taught me to ride a bicycle in our backyard, who had threatened my first boyfriend with bodily harm, who had cried openly at my wedding reception. I'm sorry, I said finally, and meant it. Are you? Are you really sorry, Rebecca? I thought about the question honestly, giving it the weight it deserved. I can't be sorry for that." He hung up without another word. The dial tone hummed in my ear for a long moment before I set down the phone. The FBI opened a formal investigation into Richard Morgan's conduct during the original 1979 missing child case. Federal agents in dark suits interviewed staff members at the Sunrise Memory Care Facility, reviewed decades of police records, and subpoenaed documents from 3 different jurisdictions. Richard himself was deemed mentally incompetent to participate in any legal proceedings. His Alzheimer's had progressed with alarming speed since my confrontation. The doctors attributed it to stress, to the shock of exposure, to the crumbling of secrets he'd spent 42 years protecting. "His mind is protecting itself," the neurologist explained when I called to check on him. "By forgetting. By retreating into earlier memories where none of this happened." I wondered if that was mercy or punishment. Perhaps both. Harold Simmons, Richard's former partner, and the detective who had deliberately sabotaged the original investigation, received no such protection from his own mind. At 76 years old, sharp and healthy, and fully aware of his crimes, he was arrested at his retirement community in Boca Raton, Florida. Federal marshals led him out in handcuffs while his neighbors watched from their porches. The charges were extensive: obstruction of justice, filing false police reports, conspiracy to conceal a felony, and most damning, accepting payments from the Morgan Family Trust over a period of 31 years. The statute of limitations had expired on the 1,979 crimes, but prosecutors discovered recent evidence that extended his culpability. Emails exchanged with Tom discussing the situation and ongoing security measures, wire transfers totaling $847,000 since 1993, a paper trail of corruption stretching across 4 decades. The news coverage was absolutely relentless. Every morning brought fresh revelations, new interviews with psychology experts, new panel discussions analyzing the phenomenon of family complicity in serious crimes. Margaret Morgan's photograph appeared on every channel, sometimes framed sympathetically as a grieving woman desperate for the child she couldn't have, sometimes portrayed as a calculating predator who had systematically stolen another woman's baby. I stopped watching after the first week. The truth was complicated enough without 24-hour cable news, reducing it to competing sound bites and hashtag campaigns. The Holloway inheritance came through 6 weeks after publication. James Holloway's estate had remained frozen in probate since his death in 2017. The $2.8 million trust inaccessible, pending legal resolution of Sarah Elizabeth Holloway's status. My DNA evidence, combined with Margaret's diary and Michael's 20-year investigation, provided overwhelming proof of identity. A Virginia Circuit Court judge signed the release order on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I became a millionaire because my biological father had spent 4 decades saving money for a daughter he never stopped believing would eventually come home. Catherine called me that evening, her voice trembling with emotion she couldn't contain. "Your father would be so incredibly proud of you," she said. "He always insisted that money was yours. He told me every year on your birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary of the day you disappeared that someday you would need it. That someday you would use it to build your real life, your true life." "I don't know what my real life looks like anymore," I admitted, staring at the legal documents spread across my dining table. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be." "That's okay, sweetheart. That's perfectly okay. You have time now. You have resources. And you have family, real family, to help you figure it out." The $450,000 family home in Millbrook transferred to my name as well, though Catherine retained lifetime residency rights as specified in James's will. Combined with the trust principal, accumulated interest, and James's $500,000 life insurance policy, the total inheritance exceeded $3.75 million. Money I had never known existed. Money saved by a father I had never known at all. Tom's attorneys sent a certified letter the following week, delivered by courier to my apartment door. The Morgan family was formally considering a civil lawsuit alleging defamation of Margaret's memory and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The letter was 12 pages of legal threats, demands for retraction, and thinly veiled intimidation. I forwarded everything to my own attorney, a media law specialist Elena had connected me with. Immediately after publication, "They have absolutely no case," she assured me during our phone consultation. "Truth is an absolute defense against any defamation claim. You cannot cause actionable emotional distress by accurately reporting verified facts. Every statement in your article is documented, sourced, and legally bulletproof. Then, why threaten a lawsuit at all?" Pressure tactics. Intimidation. An attempt to drain your financial resources and discourage further coverage. She paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It won't work. The Washington Chronicle's legal department is already preparing an aggressive countermotion. If anything, this frivolous threat will generate additional publicity for your story and further sympathy for your situation." She was right. The lawsuit threat became national news within hours. Public opinion shifted even more decisively toward the Holloways and toward me. The press conference was Michael's idea. People need to see both families standing together, he explained over dinner at Catherine's house. They need to understand this isn't about revenge or money or destroying the Morgans. It's about one woman discovering her true identity after 40 years of lies. It's about closure. It's about healing. I wasn't convinced closure was genuinely possible, but I agreed to try. We held the event in Millbrook's Community Center, the same building where James Holloway had organized desperate search parties in March 1979. Catherine sat on my right, her hand gripping mine beneath the table. Michael flanked my left, steady and protective. Reporters occupied every available seat, while cameras formed a wall along the back. "Do you hate the people who raised you?" one journalist asked. I considered carefully before answering. "I don't hate them. I hate what they did. Margaret loved me, I believe that completely. But love doesn't excuse kidnapping a child." Catherine squeezed my hand tighter. "Both things can be true simultaneously," I continued. "The love and the crime, the gratitude and the grief. I'm still learning to hold all of it." Richard Morgan died on a Thursday morning in late October, 3 months after my story went public. The memory care facility called at 6:47 a.m. I was already awake, sitting at Catherine's kitchen table in Millbrook, watching autumn leaves drift past the window. The nurse's voice was gentle, professionally sympathetic. She had delivered this news many times before. "He passed peacefully in his sleep," she said. "No pain, no distress. He was asking for Margaret at the end. He thought she was in the room with him." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat very still for a long time, feeling something I couldn't name, settle into my chest. The man who had helped steal me. The man who had covered up a kidnapping for 42 years. The man who had taught me to throw a baseball, who had checked under my bed for monsters, who had cried when I graduated from Columbia. My father was dead. One of my fathers. Anyway, Catherine found me still sitting there an hour later. Cold coffee, untouched beside me. "Richard Morgan passed away," I said. She sat down across from me, her expression complicated. This was the man who had taken her daughter, the corrupt cop who had destroyed evidence, silenced witnesses, broken her family into pieces that never fully healed. She had every right to feel satisfaction, even joy. Instead, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Sarah," she said quietly. "I know that probably sounds strange, coming from me, but I'm sorry for your loss. He was a criminal. He was also your father. For 42 years, he was your father." She squeezed my fingers. "Grief doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about justice or morality or what someone deserved. You're allowed to mourn him, sweetheart. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel." I didn't know what I felt. That was the problem. The emotions were too tangled, too contradictory, love and anger, gratitude and betrayal, sorrow and relief, all twisted together into something I couldn't untangle. "I think I need to go to the funeral," I said. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you sure?" "No. but I think I need to anyway. The service was held at St. Patrick's Catholic Church in Queens, the same church where I'd been baptized as Rebecca Ann Morgan in 1979, the same church where Margaret's funeral had taken place 6 months earlier. The Morgan family had worshipped here for decades, their donations funding the new stained glass windows, their names engraved on brass plaques throughout the building. I arrived early, slipping into a back pew before the other mourners gathered. The church smelled of incense and wood polish, and something older generations of prayers soaked into the stones. Tom spotted me immediately. He was standing near the altar, receiving condolences from elderly relatives I vaguely recognized. His face went pale when our eyes met. For a moment, I thought he might ask me to leave. Instead, he walked down the aisle and sat beside me. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, staring straight ahead at the altar. Neither did I. We sat in silence as the church filled. Richard's former colleagues from the NYPD, most of them retired now, their dress uniforms straining against decades of desk work. Neighbors from our old street in Queens, family members I hadn't seen since childhood, aunts and uncles and cousins who had watched me grow up without ever knowing the truth. Several of them glanced at me with open hostility. The woman who had destroyed their family's reputation, the ungrateful daughter who had exposed her own father's crimes. I kept my eyes forward and my spine straight. The priest delivered a standard eulogy. Richard's years of service, his dedication to family, his devotion to the church. He didn't mention the kidnapping. He didn't mention the cover-up. He spoke of a good man who had made mistakes, who had sought forgiveness, who had loved his children deeply. It was a lie wrapped in truth, or perhaps truth wrapped in lies. I couldn't tell anymore. After the burial, Tom found me standing alone at the edge of the cemetery. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was hoarse from crying, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. I know it couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. He stood beside me, both of us staring at the fresh grave. Workers in the distance were already preparing to fill it in, efficient, practiced, indifferent to the complicated grief of those left behind. "I've been disbarred," Tom said quietly. "Official notification came last week. 30 years of practice. Gone. My partners bought me out generous terms, considering they wanted distance from the scandal. I'm sorry. Are you?" He turned to look at me directly. After everything I did, everything I hid, I thought about it carefully before answering. "I'm sorry for the person you could have been, the brother you could have been, if you'd made different choices in 2002. I'm sorry that protecting a crime cost you everything. It cost me my sister too. You never had me, Tom." "Not really. You had Rebecca Morgan, a fiction created by our parents. I was always Sarah Holloway. You just didn't want to see it." He flinched as if I'd struck him. But he didn't argue. "I owe you an apology," he said after a long pause. "A real one. Not for Mom and Dad, I can't apologize for what they did. But for my part, for 24 years of knowing the truth and saying nothing, for trying to bribe you, for threatening you with lawsuits." His voice cracked. "For choosing the family I wanted over the sister who deserved better. I hadn't expected this. Not from Tom." "I was scared," he continued, tears streaming down his face now. "I was 24 years old, and I found out my mother was a kidnapper, and my father was a corrupt cop. My whole identity collapsed. Everything I believed about who I was, who we were, all of it was built on something monstrous." He wiped his eyes roughly. "So I told myself it was ancient history, that you were happy, that the truth would only cause more pain. I convinced myself that silence was mercy. It wasn't. I know that now. I should have known it then." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "Mom wrote this before she died. She asked me to give it to you if you ever found out the truth. I've been carrying it for months, trying to decide whether to burn it or deliver it." I took the envelope. My name, Rebecca, was written on the front in Margaret's familiar handwriting. "I don't know if it will help," Tom said. "I don't know if anything can help, but it's yours." It was always meant to be yours. He touched my shoulder briefly, the first physical contact we'd had since the truth emerged, and walked away toward the waiting cars. I stood alone in the cemetery, holding a letter from the woman who had stolen me, surrounded by the graves of strangers and the ghost of a life that had never really been mine. I didn't open the envelope until I was back in Millbrook, sitting alone in the bedroom that had once belonged to a 3-year-old girl named Sarah. Catherine had offered to stay with me, but I needed privacy for this. Whatever Margaret Morgan had written in her final days, whatever confession or justification or plea waited inside that cream-colored envelope, I needed to face it alone. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Margaret always used for important correspondence. My name on the front, Rebecca, was written in her elegant cursive, the same handwriting that had signed permission slips and birthday cards throughout my childhood. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out 2 pages, densely filled with words that must have taken her hours to write. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this letter, then you know the truth. You know what I did 42 years ago, and you know that the life you've lived has been built on a foundation I created through an act of terrible desperation. I want to explain, even though explanations aren't excuses. I want you to understand, even though understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. In 1975, I had surgery that took away my ability to have children. I was 31 years old. Richard and I had been trying for 6 years, had suffered through 3 miscarriages, had spent every penny on treatments insurance wouldn't cover. When the doctor told me I would never carry a child, something inside me broke completely. I spent the next 4 years in a fog of grief and medication and desperate longing. I watched other women push strollers down our street and felt hatred so intense it frightened me. I held my friends' babies at christenings and had to excuse myself to cry in bathroom stalls. I was losing my mind, Rebecca. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Then the Holloways moved in next door. I watched you from our kitchen window every single day. You were so beautiful. Dark curls, bright eyes, a laugh that carried across both yards. You were everything I had ever wanted, everything I had been denied. And I convinced myself your parents were neglecting you. I convinced myself God had placed you there for me to find. I told myself so many lies, Rebecca. And the worst part is, I believed every single one. I set the letter down, pressing my palms against my eyes. Catherine had told me the Holloways weren't neglectful. James had been sober for years before I was born. The picture Margaret painted was a distortion, a narrative constructed to justify the unjustifiable. But had Margaret known that? Or had her broken mind genuinely perceived danger where none existed? I continued reading. The day I took you, I wasn't thinking clearly. I saw you crying in the backyard, alone again, and something snapped. I walked across the property line, picked you up, and carried you into our house. No plan, no preparation, just a desperate woman finally taking what she believed she deserved. Richard found us in the basement 3 hours later. You were sleeping in my arms while I sang you a lullaby. He was terrified. He wanted to return you immediately. But I couldn't let go. I physically couldn't release you. He made calls. His partner Harold helped falsify reports, misdirect the investigation. Within 2 weeks, we had forged adoption papers. Within a month, we were in New York. I know what we did was wrong. I have known it every single day for 42 years. But Rebecca, the moment I held you, you became my daughter. Not legally, not morally, but in my heart, in my soul. I loved you with a ferocity that frightened me. I would have killed for you. I would have died for you. That love wasn't healthy. It wasn't right, but it was real, the most real thing I have ever felt. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I have no right, but I want you to know, you were not a replacement child. You were not a consolation prize. You were my daughter, my Rebecca, my entire heart walking around outside my body for 42 miraculous years. I hope someday you can remember the good parts, the bedtime stories, the birthday cakes, the way I held you when you had nightmares. I hope you can hold those memories even as you learn to hate me. I loved you, Rebecca. I loved you from the first moment I saw you, and I will love you beyond death itself. Forgive me if you can. Forget me if you must. But please remember, you were loved. You were wanted. You were mine. Forever your mother. Margaret. I read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it back in the envelope. Margaret Morgan had been mentally ill. Not an excuse, an explanation. Her desperation had twisted into obsession, her grief into delusion, her love into possession. She had convinced herself she was saving me when she was actually destroying 2 families. And yet she had loved me. Genuinely, completely, with every fiber of her broken being. The woman who had kidnapped me had also kissed my scraped knees, celebrated my achievements, and held my hand through my divorce. The monster and the mother had been the same person all along. I walked downstairs and found Catherine reading in the living room. She looked up when I entered, her eyes full of questions she was too kind to ask. She loved me, I said simply. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it okay. But she loved me. Catherine nodded slowly. I believe that. I've always believed that, even when I hated her most. She patted the cushion beside her. Come sit with me, sweetheart. Come sit with your mother. I sat down next to the woman who had given me life, holding a letter from the woman who had stolen it, and finally allowed myself to cry for both of them. November brought the first real test of my fractured identity. Thanksgiving. Catherine had been planning the meal for weeks. Turkey, with her mother's cornbread stuffing, sweet potato casserole with marshmallow topping, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, 3 kinds of pie. The recipes had been passed down through 4 generations of Holloway women recipes I should have learned as a child, standing on a step stool in this very kitchen. I know it's a lot, Catherine said, watching me study the handwritten recipe cards spread across her counter. We don't have to do all of this. We could just order something simple. No. I picked up a card yellowed with age, the handwriting faded but still legible. Grandma Ruth's apple pie. I want to learn. I want to know where I came from. Michael arrived Wednesday evening, his truck loaded with firewood and wine. He'd taken a week off from the police department, his first real vacation in 3 years, he admitted. The Holloway case had consumed him for 2 decades. Now that it was solved, he wasn't sure what to do with himself. I keep reaching for the files, he confessed, as we stacked wood by the fireplace. Every morning, I wake up and think about what lead to chase next. Then I remember, there are no more leads. It's over. Is it strange? I asked. Having me here? After all those years of searching? He paused, a log balanced in his hands. Strange isn't the right word. It's like, he searched for the comparison. It's like being colorblind your whole life. And then suddenly, seeing red for the first time. Everything looks different. Everything means something different. Thanksgiving dinner was nothing like the Morgans' formal affairs. White tablecloths, polished silver, rigid seating arrangements, and conversations that never strayed beyond safe topics. Catherine's table was crowded and chaotic. Michael told inappropriate jokes. Catherine laughed until she cried. We ate with our elbows on the table and went back for thirds without apology. For the first time in my life, I understood what family was supposed to feel like. The Christmas invitation arrived December 3rd, postmarked from a Manhattan address I didn't recognize. Tom had moved after his disbarment, sold the Upper East Side apartment, settled into something smaller in Brooklyn. The letter was handwritten, 3 paragraphs of careful script that must have taken him hours to compose. Rebecca or Sarah, whichever you prefer now. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I know what I did, what I failed to do, what I covered up for 24 years. But Christmas was always Mom's favorite holiday. And this year, I'll be spending it alone for the first time in my life. If you could find it in your heart to visit, even for an hour, I would be grateful. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm just asking for the chance to be your brother again. Even if that brother is deeply flawed. Whatever you decide, I understand. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn back what I destroyed. Tom, I showed the letter to Catherine, expecting her to tell me to throw it away, to remind me of everything the Morgans had stolen, to encourage me to cut ties with that family forever. Instead, she read it twice, then handed it back with a sad smile. He's trying, she said. That's more than most people manage. You think I should go? I think you should do whatever brings you peace. She took my hands in hers, her fingers thin and weathered, marked by decades of grief and hope. Sarah, I spent 42 years consumed by hatred. Hatred for Margaret. Hatred for Richard. Cole. Hatred for everyone who failed to find you. And you know what that hatred gave me? What? Nothing. Absolutely nothing except ulcers and insomnia and a bitterness that poisoned every good thing in my life. She squeezed my hands. If you can find a way to let go of the anger, not forget, not excuse, but let go, you'll be stronger than I ever was. I spent Christmas Eve in Millbrook with Catherine and Michael. We attended midnight mass at the church where I'd been baptized as Sarah Elizabeth Holloway 45 years ago. The priest who had christened me was long dead, but his successor welcomed me home with tears in his eyes. Christmas morning, I drove to Brooklyn. Tom's new apartment was small and sparse, a far cry from the luxury he'd known his whole life. He answered the door in jeans and a sweater, dark circles under his eyes, gray streaking his temples in a way I hadn't noticed before. You came, he said, his voice cracking. I came. We sat in his tiny living room, drinking coffee and watching snow fall past the window. We didn't talk about the kidnapping. We didn't talk about the cover-up or the disbarment or the lawsuits. We talked about Mom's Christmas cookies and Dad's terrible attempts at caroling. We talked about childhood memories that were real, even if the foundation beneath them was false. I miss them, Tom admitted quietly. Every day. I know what they did was wrong. I know they destroyed lives. But they were still my parents. They still loved me. They loved me too, I said. That's the hardest part. Holding both truths at once, he looked at me with something like wonder. How do you do it? How do you forgive? I haven't forgiven. Not completely. Maybe not ever. I set down my coffee cup. But I've decided that carrying hatred is heavier than carrying grief. I'd rather mourn what was lost than rage against what can't be changed. Tom reached out and took my hand, the first voluntary contact between us since the truth emerged. Thank you, he whispered, for coming, for trying, for being better than any of us deserved. I squeezed his hand and watched the snow continue to fall, covering Brooklyn in white, burying the old year beneath something clean and new. 2 families, 2 histories, 2 sets of memories that didn't quite fit together, and somehow, impossibly, one woman learning to hold them both. The check sat on my kitchen table for 3 weeks before I could bring myself to deposit it. $2,847,623.41. The exact balance of James Holloway's trust, accumulated over 40 years of careful saving and compound interest. Money set aside by a father who never stopped believing his daughter would come home. Money I had never known existed until 6 months ago. Combined with the house, the life insurance, and the smaller accounts Catherine had transferred to my name, my total inheritance exceeded $3.75 million. More money than I had ever imagined possessing. More money than most people earned in a lifetime. And I had no idea what to do with it. Elena Vasquez noticed my distraction during our weekly editorial meeting. Afterward, she pulled me into her office and closed the door. You look like someone who's carrying something heavy, she said, pouring us both cups of terrible office coffee. Want to talk about it? I told her about the inheritance, about the guilt of profiting from my own tragedy, about the paralysis of having resources I hadn't earned and didn't know how to use responsibly. Elena listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her cup and looked at me with the same intensity she brought to breaking news. "Your father saved that money for you," she said. "Not for the daughter he lost, for the daughter he believed would return. He wanted you to have options, choices, freedom." She paused. "What would you choose if guilt wasn't a factor?" The answer came immediately, surprising me with its clarity. I'd help other families. Families like the Holloways. Parents searching for children who disappeared. Kids who don't know who they really are. I thought of James's decades of investigation. Michael's 20 years of obsession. The system failed my biological family. Police dismissed them. Evidence was buried. They had to fight alone for 42 years. I'd want to make sure other families don't have to fight alone. Elena smiled. "Then, that's your answer." I spent the next 2 months researching nonprofit structures, consulting with attorneys, and interviewing experts in missing children cases. Dr. Patricia Wells, the DNA specialist who had helped confirm my identity, connected me with advocacy organizations across the country. Michael introduced me to detectives who specialized in cold cases. Catherine shared her experiences navigating a system designed to make grieving parents give up. By March, the foundation had a name: the Holloway Morgan Foundation for Missing Children. The name was deliberate, controversial, even. Several advisors suggested dropping Morgan entirely. Why honor the family that had stolen me? But I insisted. Margaret's crime had been monstrous, but her desperation had stemmed from a system that offered infertile couples no support, no counseling, no alternatives. Richard's cover-up had been possible because police departments lacked oversight and accountability. The Morgans were villains, yes, but they were also symptoms of broader failures. The foundation would address both sides, helping families search for missing children and reforming the systems that allowed children to disappear in the first place. I announced the foundation at a press conference in April, exactly 1 year after my article had gone viral. Catherine stood on my right, Michael on my left. Tom watched from the back of the room. Uninvited, but not unwelcome. My biological father spent 40 years saving money for a daughter he never stopped loving, I said, reading from prepared remarks that I'd rewritten 17 times. My adoptive mother spent 40 years loving a daughter she should never have taken. Both of those truths exist simultaneously. Both of those truths shaped who I am. I looked at the cameras, the reporters, the faces of strangers who had followed my story for a year. The Holloway Morgan Foundation will honor both legacies not by excusing what was done, but by ensuring it doesn't happen again. We will fund DNA databases, train law enforcement, support searching families, and advocate for reforms that protect children and hold kidnappers accountable. The questions came rapid fire. How much was I donating? All of it. Every penny of the inheritance, except what was needed for Catherine's care. Wasn't I worried about honoring the Morgan name? No, I was worried about pretending evil exists in a vacuum, separate from the systems that enable it. Did I forgive the Morgans? Forgiveness wasn't the point. Action was the point. The foundation officially launched on June 15th, 46 years and 3 months after I was stolen from a backyard in Millbrook, Virginia. Our first grant went to a cold case unit in Ohio, funding DNA testing for 17 unidentified children. Our second supported a family in Texas whose son had been missing for 12 years. By the end of the first year, we had helped solve 3 cases and provided resources to over 200 searching families. Catherine cried when I showed her the first annual report. "Your father would be so proud," she said, tracing the foundation logo with her fingertip, a photograph emerging from shadow into light. "This is exactly what he would have wanted." "It's what I want too," I said. "It's the only thing that makes sense of any of this." Michael called that evening with news. Another case solved. A teenager in Florida, taken as an infant, reunited with her biological parents after 16 years. The DNA match had been funded by our foundation. "She's going home," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because of you. Because of what you built." I hung up and stood at my window, watching the sun set over the Virginia hills. The house I stood in had belonged to James Holloway. The money that funded the foundation had been saved by a man I never knew. The mission that drove me forward had been born from a crime I hadn't asked to survive. But here I was. Sarah Elizabeth Holloway, Rebecca Ann Morgan, a woman with two names, two families, two histories that would never fully reconcile. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the contradictions weren't problems to solve but truths to carry. Maybe my inheritance wasn't just money, it was the responsibility to transform tragedy into something meaningful. I picked up my phone and dialed Catherine's number. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I'm coming home for dinner." 2 years after I discovered a photograph that changed everything, I returned to the place where it all began. The backyard in Millbrook looked smaller than I remembered, though, of course, I didn't actually remember it. I had been 3 years old when Margaret Morgan walked across the property line and lifted me from this patch of grass. Too young to retain memories. Too young to understand that my life was about to split into two parallel tracks that would take 42 years to converge. Catherine stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. She was 70 now, her hair completely silver, her steps slower than they'd been when I first met her, but her eyes were bright, brighter than they'd been in decades. She told me, brighter than they'd been since the 15th of March 1979. "This is where you were playing," she said softly, pointing to a spot near the old oak tree. "You had a red ball. You loved that ball, carried it everywhere. When we couldn't find you, the ball was still there, just sitting in the grass, waiting for you to come back." I tried to imagine it. A toddler with dark curls, laughing in the sunshine. A desperate woman watching from the kitchen window next door. A moment of opportunity that would destroy multiple lives and create others. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" I asked. "If she hadn't taken me?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "Every day for 42 years. Every single day." She turned to face me. "But I've stopped wondering now, because wondering about what might have been only steals from what actually is. And what actually is having you here. Knowing you're alive. Watching you build something meaningful from all this pain that's more than I ever dared to hope for." The Holloway Morgan Foundation had grown beyond my expectations. In 2 years, we had helped solve 11 cold cases, reuniting families separated by kidnapping, trafficking, and parental abduction. We had funded DNA testing for over 300 unidentified children. We had trained law enforcement officers in 18 states and advocated for legislative reforms that closed loopholes kidnappers had exploited for decades. But the numbers weren't what mattered most. What mattered was Maria Santos, whose daughter had been taken by her ex-husband in 2019 and hidden across 3 state lines. Our investigators found her in 8 months. What mattered was David Chen, who had been raised by a woman claiming to be his aunt, and discovered at age 30 that his real parents had been searching for him since he was 4. What mattered was the families who finally had answers, even when those answers were painful. Even when closure meant grief instead of reunion. The truth mattered. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Michael had been promoted to captain, overseeing the cold case division he'd worked in for 20 years. Tom had rebuilt his life slowly, not as a lawyer, but as a legal consultant for wrongful conviction nonprofits. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his career helping people the system had failed, the way he had failed me. I wasn't sure I believed his transformation was complete, but I believed he was trying. And sometimes, trying was enough. Catherine and I had dinner together every Sunday. She taught me the recipes I should have learned as a child. Grandma Ruth's apple pie, Great Aunt Helen's pot roast, the secret to perfect biscuits that had been passed down through 5 generations of Holloway women. I was learning my heritage one meal at a time, filling in gaps that could never be fully closed. I still thought about the Morgans. Every day, if I was honest. Richard's confusion in the memory care facility. Calling for a wife who would never answer. Margaret's letter, folded in my desk drawer, read so many times the creases had begun to tear. Tom's face at Christmas, desperate for connection he hadn't earned. I had 2 families. I would always have 2 families. And the weight of that truth had become something I carried, rather than something that crushed me. On the second anniversary of my article's publication, Elena asked me to write a follow-up piece for the Washington Chronicle. Not an investigation this time, a reflection, a personal essay about what I had learned in the 2 years since discovering my true identity. I sat at my desk for 3 days before the words finally came. I was investigating a cold case. I was the missing child. That sentence changed my life. It revealed truths I never wanted to know, destroyed certainties I had built my entire identity upon, and forced me to reckon with questions that have no satisfying answers. Was I stolen or saved? Was Margaret Morgan a monster or a desperate woman broken by grief? Was Richard a corrupt cop or a father who made terrible choices out of love? Can someone who commits an unforgivable act still deserve compassion? I don't have answers to these questions. I'm not sure anyone does, but I've learned something in the 2 years since I found that photograph. I've learned that truth is not the same as justice, and justice is not the same as peace. I've learned that love can coexist with crime, that grief can coexist with gratitude, that forgiveness can coexist with accountability. I've learned that identity is not something you're born with. It's something you build, piece by piece, from the fragments of your experience. I was Sarah Elizabeth Holloway for 3 years. I was Rebecca Ann Morgan for 42. Now I am something new. A woman shaped by both names, both families, both histories. If you're watching this and you're searching for someone, a child, a sibling, a parent who disappeared, please don't give up. The truth is out there, buried in databases and documents, and the memories of people who know more than they've admitted. Keep looking. Keep fighting. Keep believing that someday, somehow, the missing will be found. And if you're watching this, and you know something about a missing child, a secret you've carried, a lie you've protected, a truth you've been afraid to tell, please find the courage to speak. Every day of silence is another day a family spends in agony. Every day of hiding is another day a child doesn't know who they really are. The truth matters, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. My name is Sarah Rebecca Holloway Morgan. I was stolen at age 3 and found at age 45. And if my story proves anything, it's this. It's never too late to come home. I published the essay on a Sunday morning. By Monday, our foundation had received over 2,000 new inquiries. Families searching, witnesses ready to talk, children wondering if their lives were built on lies. Catherine called me that evening. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said. "I know, Mom," I said. "I finally know."